Hey all, just thought I'd put together a quick LMU basics video. I'll quickly go through some settings, nothing super in depth, just hopefully point out some things that people might find helpful. I'll also set up a offline weekend in a way that I think will help practice for a league race. And then I'll also quickly go through an online race I did to show you the rolling start procedure, setting up and doing a pit stop and all those sorts of things. This will be pretty quick and easy. I'm not doing anything super crazy, but I just wanted to try and sort of put all this information into a single spot to hopefully help people prepare for things like league races or their first online race, that sort of thing. So hopefully someone finds this helpful. Alright, cheers. So first, we'll go through some game settings. A lot of this is personal preference depending on what you like and what your computer can manage and all those sorts of things. But there's a couple that I think are handy and good for people to know. Firstly, I think it's good to leave auto clutch on. It's just one less thing to worry about. If you spin, your car's not going to stall and you don't have to worry about trying to get it restarted again. It'll help on race starts, all that sort of stuff. I'm not looking for so much immersion that I need to run clutch, so I leave that one on. Everything else here I leave off. Your repeat shifts is good. That's basically if you're spamming up or down shift, how long in between it'll let you change. Uh, I think 100 milliseconds is default and it seems to work pretty well, but that's what that one does. Auto start engine is another one I think is kind of handy. Often in other games I will have it manually start engine. However, in LMU, having the engine start automatically for the race start, I believe helps. You can get rolling right when the timer hits zero, so you don't have to possibly contend with trying to catch up to the train and deal with a quote unquote dangerous driving penalty. And you also don't need to stop your car in pit stops. So I find it less important to have a button bound for your engine start, so I normally just leave it as auto. Windscreen wipers and headlights as well, just less to worry about. There's your damage and your AI if you need to worry about it. And down here for HUD, uh, I suggest you have full HUD so you can see as much as information as possible. The scale, that's how much of the screen it fills up. So for me, running an ultra wide full puts all the HUD elements in the very corners, whereas if I set it to normal, even on an ultra wide, the HUD elements will fit the size of a normal uh, aspect ratio screen, and wide just sort of sits in between the two. I run it full because I want less in my direct field of view, uh, and they can just sit in the corners and I can look at them when I need them. Track map, I prefer full. Um, this is where you find that option if you want full or just the local track around you, the driver. Uh, but yeah, as I said, I prefer full. However, there is a button to bind. You can bind a button to change between the different track maps. So if you like both, or if you can't decide, you can bind a button that way. And lastly, here's your replay save location and how long instant replays are, and your network connection. Find what works for you. They do have presets, but yeah, I've tried to give it as much internet as I can without going overboard, and this seems to work fairly well. It is a bit tricky going OCE to EU sometimes, but the netcode seems to work alright. Next is controls. Obviously, this will depend primarily on what your wheelbase and wheel and pedals are. This will all be different per person. There's a couple of things that I think are important to keep in mind. You may want to bind a shifter neutral. If you've ever found in a slow speed corner while you're braking, you're shifting down, shift to first, and then accidentally press it again and go to neutral, and you don't realize, and when you go to accelerate, obviously you're not in gear. Having a shift to neutral button allows you to make a setting to stop that from happening mid-race. There is also another setting that I'll show you in a second. The other one is request pit stop. So basically, the game treats the pit stop like real people, and if you come into the pit stop early without requesting the stop, I believe it gets delayed. It will be a longer pit stop than if you request it and give them time, per se, to get the tires and get the fuel and the virtual energy ready. So the game will do this automatically when you're running low on fuel, because you have like the spotter and whatnot keeping an eye on your car, so when they see you're low on fuel, the game automatically requests a pit stop. But say if your car gets damaged and you need to come in early, for whatever reason it's not automatically requested, you can assign a button to request it to make sure you don't have a slower pit stop than what you are already going to have. The biggest one that you definitely should bind if you have the option is your MFD settings. You can pretty much change all in-car electronics, being TC, ABS, and ARBs in the hypercars from here. You can manage your battery in the hypercars. You can set up your pit stop, all that sort of stuff, all from here. So the MFD is by far the most important, and if you've only got enough to bind that, then that's what you should do. Next is car controls. Here, that's where your speed limiter is and your headlight pulse is your flashing. They're fairly important, particularly because we don't allow speed limiters, auto speed limiters most of the time, plus it'll likely be faster. If you've got the room, here's all your traction control options. Your override is just turning it off. So say if you're looking for that last half a tenth, trying to gain time somewhere, you can just turn the TC off by holding a button. There's all your other TC options. There's your ABS, brake bias. For hypercar drivers, if you have room, the thing I would prioritize is binding your regen. So when managing your battery, you don't want it to be at 100% and you don't want it to be at 0. So your battery can go in, I believe, at least in the hypercars I've driven, the battery goes in increments of 10, so it's like 0 kilowatts up to 50 kilowatts. 50 kilowatts being a lot of hybrid activation with 0 being none, obviously. And you'll find that on some tracks, 40 kilowatts will, for example, 40 kilowatts will regen just a bit too much, and you'll slowly end up back at 100. Whereas 30 doesn't regen enough, and you'll slowly drain the battery. So it is something to keep in mind, and you will have to sort of adjust it throughout a race. So having a binding for regen specifically can come in handy. Again, it is all doable through the MFD, so it's not the end of the world. Gameplay, most of this is single player. The only one that I've set is the alternate ESC because I wanted a pause button on my steering wheel. Otherwise, I believe it's just your normal escape button on your keyboard. Camera options for anyone who does things like VR or if you're doing... here is your seat and FOV options. Now, there's nothing here on wheel and pedals because I don't have the options on my wheel. But what you'll find is you can come up here and go to keyboard, and that's where all these settings are. So it's the same page, but it shows you specifically the buttons on the device that you're using. So here I've set up my seat and FOV options, plus a couple of other things, specifically on the keyboard because I don't need them super frequently. Maybe if it's the first time in a car, I'll have to move the seat around, but once it's set up, it's normally good to go. Next, interaction. There's not a lot here. Here's your toggle HUD if you just want to turn your HUD off, say for a quali lap. If you're in a private quali session, you don't want to see delta, you can probably turn your HUD off. Cycle mirrors if you want to turn your rear view mirror off if someone's flashing you. And there's your track map. So if you want full track map or driver track map at certain points, you can set a button to switch between them here. You can also do your standings and delta target lap times. The other thing I use here is reset force feedback. So I was finding switching from a qualifying session to a race session, I would lose force feedback, and setting a button on my wheel to reset it, I can bring it back whenever that happens. There's some replay options and specific text chat options. Next is calibrate options. Obviously this is more specific to your hardware again, but some options I would recommend keeping. So you got your steering wheel range from vehicle, basically whatever the car's in-game range is, it will automatically set that in-game, and then it uses this use steering wheel maximum rotation from driver. It pulls whatever your maximum rotation is from your base to make sure it lines up with the game. So I'm on a Moza R9. In my Moza software, I have it set to 900 degrees. So I've turned this on, so now the game knows I'm at 900 degrees, and I've turned the wheel range from vehicle on, so that it soft locks it to whatever that specific vehicle's range is. Everything lines up perfect, and I don't have to worry about it. Then you have some head movement options. I don't like things like yaw and look ahead, so I've turned them off. And in general, I wanted my head physics to be fairly low. I don't necessarily want my head to be locked to the car, so I have them down at 8%. That's what I found works well for me, but I didn't want any look ahead or back and forward sort of motions. Didn't want head vibration either. I don't necessarily need that sort of realism. I just need to be able to see where I'm going. Here in wheel settings, I like these two settings. I particularly use the first one. So prevent downshifting to neutral if neutral is configured. So again, I assigned a neutral button. So now if I need to go to reverse, I go to first, I hit the neutral button, and then I put it into, I downshift again to go into reverse. Saves me from accidentally hitting it mid-race, which is really good. If you prefer, you can also just use simultaneous shift up and shift down. So hit both pedals and you go to go to neutral. Sorry. So yeah, you can either hit the button and then shift down to reverse, or hit both pedals and then shift down to go reverse. Whatever you find easier. There's your LEDs and hardware displays for whatever you have. If they're not working, maybe check these settings. Next is force feedback. Again, personal preference depending on what your kit is. I mentioned I have a Moser R9. Here's what I'm running. Uh, Feel free to try it if you want. They're not perfect. I find when the car is off and I'm just sitting on the tarmac, my wheels start shaking, so there's something weird going on there. But while I'm driving, feels pretty good. It certainly doesn't completely cover up the fact that there's not a lot of low speed feedback from the front tires at the moment. Um, but in general, I think it feels pretty damn good. Next is graphics. Again, this is pretty independent on what equipment you have and what you want to get out of it. Um, a couple of things that I do recommend are sort of lower down here. Here's your visible vehicles. So if you're really struggling with FPS, lowering this can help a lot. You only need to see a few cars around you to understand what's going on. So lowering that can be a big help. Live TV displays is also a good one. Having TV displays basically is rebroadcasting what you see onto these screens next to the track to increase immersion, make it feel like a broadcasted event, but it's just extra processing power that you don't need to use. Battery units, I prefer percentage because it's easier to understand at a glance than kilowatt and kilowatt hours. Uh, there you can set your default view to cockpit here. Mirrors, turn them on here. Steering wheel, again, whether your preference is locked wheel, or no arms, that sort of thing. I'm currently running no arms because a couple of when I'm running in hypercars, they've got a bit of information on the wheel themselves in game that I want to see. Your vertical FOV, I personally find that a strange name. It it to me it's just your FOV because it's not up and down, but it's how wide you're seeing. But I guess technically vertical FOV, but that's where you come in to set that. So once you've sort of all the normal calculations you do to figure out your FOV, that's where you throw them in. And here's your lock to horizon. So I said before that I like a little bit of head movement, so I'm not completely locked to the car. Say like Sebring, if you're completely locked to the car going up and over those bumps, you're not going to be able to see anything. So here I run it at low, just so the head's not completely locked and I can keep a better view of what's going on around me. And for our virtual reality users, you got some more options down the bottom here. Lastly is sound. Again, personal preference. I haven't messed with this too much with any of these settings. Spotted lap times I do except for race. So when I'm in a practice and when I'm in a quali, it'll tell me what lap times I'm doing. But in the race, I'm less concerned about that. I can sort of figure out what's going on around me to the cars, so I don't need lap times in the race. So that's one setting I would suggest playing around with. And then of course you have your mixer here. So I've turned off the UI music volume because as great as the song is, after about 50 hours it gets pretty tiring. And then I've messed with everything else. There's no good mixing options for like car sounds yet. It's just onboard volume. Where as much as I'd like to mess with tire sounds compared to chassis sounds compared to all those sorts of things. But I found at least 25% works fairly well for me in this setup. Alright, the next thing I'll do is I'll set up a race weekend. in a way that I think works best to practice for a league race. So coming in here, primarily you're going to be going to season 2024 because we're running in the newer hypercars and GT3 cars. I believe the older hypercars are still in here, things like the Van Wall. Let's have a quick look. But first of all, you choose the track. So whatever track you're racing that week, whether it's for online or league racing or whatnot, you come in here, have a look. If for whatever reason it's not there, that might be because you've had the championship tracks selected, and that is missing specifically Portimao, Monza, and Sebring. So if you're racing one of these three, either come to bonus or just go all, and they'll all line up here. So we'll select Le Mans because that's a popular track. And once you've selected the track, they might also be running a different circuit layout, and this is where you can choose that. So obviously we have the default, which they use in WC, but they have also added the no chicane Mulsanne circuit, which is a lot of fun. So let's stick with that one. So here you've got all your hypercars. So actually, yeah, the Van Wall isn't here. So if you're racing something like a Van Wall, you will have to go to the 2023 season. The Isotta Franschini is here, which is good. And the Peugeot, I think, is the winged Peugeot here. So if you want the wingless Peugeot, I believe you'll also have to go to 2023. But regardless, so this is where you do your car select. So obviously you got Hypercar GT3, and they do have LMP2s here because they do race at Le Mans for the 24-hour. But primarily Hypercars and GT3s are what we'll be in. So come and pick your car. Let's go the yellow Ferrari just to be slightly different. They've added these WEC Jokers. I'm not actually particularly sure what the difference is. But let's stick with the Joker. So now you've picked your car, you come into the event settings. This is the more important part. So on this title page, you can set up 99% of the things that I think are good for a practice session. So first of all, you can turn off qualifying and race. You just click on these dots if they are on, and you get rid of them, and then you leave your practice on. You can set how long it is. Normally, I'm not going to be practicing for more than an hour at a time, so 1 hour has been perfectly okay. And the next thing is down here in starting grid, you can remove all of these as well. That means you have the server to yourself. So you're not going to have to be racing anybody else or dealing with any of that. The AI are pretty good, so if you want to get used to sort of dealing with other traffic, go right ahead. But just for the sake of practicing, getting used to a track and figuring out the setup, I'd like to have it empty. And down here, I set rules to strict, because then at least I'm practicing with the strictest rules, and it's not going to be worse when I go into a race. It's only going to be more lenient if they are, so that makes it easier. Fuel usage and tire wear. Check what the race you're going to do has, because you can set them to say 2x fuel usage, which is pretty common, or 2x tire wear if that's a thing. Just so you're practicing with the same settings, particularly fuel usage, because that'll matter for your fuel calculations. Tire warmers, for newer people, I would actually suggest keeping them off, because I think it is important to understand how to drive these cars on cold tires, because it does genuinely make a difference, and they can be difficult to drive. So it is important to get a feeling for that. However, once you've done that enough and you have the understanding of how to drive these cars on cold tires, again, I just want to learn the track and figure out the setup as much as I can as quickly as possible. So I leave the tire warmers on so the car's at 100% performance sooner rather than later. Available tires, I've just set that to max because I just want to be able to swap them constantly. I don't need to sit there with only 4 tires. But if for whatever reason you want to keep track of tire wear, that's probably a good way to do it. Just set it to 4, do 45-minute sessions. You could be changing around settings a lot, but then you'll still only have 1 set of tires worth of wear. I guess that's one thing you could do with that. We'll quickly go through advanced options. So here you can also turn the setting individual sessions on and off, but you also get more granular settings. So here again you can set your practice length, but you can start putting in like individual minutes if you wanted. You can also set your start time. I normally just do midday, that's fine. But if you're doing a night race, make sure you set it to night. Private practice, so this is double tapping the fact that I've turned all the other cars off. The private practice does the same thing that you might have seen with private qualifying, where everyone is driving at the same time, but you don't see anybody else. So even if something else bugs or you miss the setting and there are cars in the server, having private practice on means you'll still be by yourself. So I've just double tapped that just to make sure, but it stays on by default at this point, so I don't have to worry about it. The biggest thing that I wanted to point out is the practice starting grip. The game implements this initially realistically in the way that if teams first rock up to a racetrack, the track's not going to be rubbered up at all, so the grip will be fairly low. Then as they go through the practice sessions and into qualifying, there'll be a bit more grip, so the preset moves up to medium, and then for the race, you get preset heavy, where most of the rubbers lay down and you have the most grip. However, I want to be on the pace as quickly as possible, so I set that to heavy straight up. So when you go into your practice server, you have full grip, so that you're not 8 seconds off the pace, you're only 6, and you feel good about yourself. Next one, you can set weather. I normally just click the sun, and that works well enough. If you need to worry about temperatures specifically, you can set them in here. Maybe you're doing a cold race or it's a particularly hot race. That's a good way to double check that. You do also have overcast, rainy, and I believe the calendar matches it to current in real life temperatures, but I'd have to confirm that. I don't know off the top of my head. Most of the time, I just hit sunny, unless it's something specific. Next is Advanced tab. So you can come and mess with the timescale here again. You got your flag rules, track limit rules. Again, I set these just to like full and strict, just so I'm practicing with the hardest set of restrictions. Then it's not going to be any worse once I get into a race. If you're used to them being strict, then going into a server and them being relaxed will just make it a lot easier, instead of practicing on relaxed and going into a strict server. Mechanical failures, I'm not entirely sure what these do, to be honest. I've never just been driving along and the car's broken. The only failures I've had is when I've put it in a wall. I don't think that affects this, so I'll get back to you on that one. AI aggression, if you're running AI, and your track limit points, again, that's only for a race. So while we're just doing a practice session, that's not going to come into effect. Alright, cool. So we set up our session. Actually, I've just remembered one little tip. If you set your practice starting grip to heavy, but then go to one of the other tabs and then leave, it resets it. So, set it to heavy. Last thing you do. Cool. So now we know that the track is at max grip. We've got it to a 1 hour practice session. There's no other cars. It's a private session. Everything's good to go. We're happy with what we're doing. Start your race weekend. Alright, so we're on track now. So we'll go through the elements here. So you come in and you go to the standings page first. On the left, you got the sessions that are here for the weekend. So obviously we just set up a practice, so there's nothing else that's going to appear. But when you join like a full race server, you'll see practice, you'll see qualifying, you'll see race, and it will tell you all the information you need to know about them here. And then you got all the drivers that are in the server as well. So you can see what class they are, what team, what tire they're on, all that sort of stuff in their laps. Top right, you have the forecast and temperatures, what time it currently is, how long's left in the session. Also down the bottom here, you can see these little ticks. You can choose which classes to look at. So I can turn these two off, and obviously that's not going to do anything because no one's here. But if I also turn Hypercar off, now nothing's here. So if you just wanted to just see GT3 times for whatever reason, you can do that. If you just wanted to see Hypercar times, you can just do that. But otherwise, it doesn't matter too much, but you can turn them on and off there. You can also go watch here, which is basically your spectating option, so you can go watch people drive around the track. That's where you do that. Live timing, it's very similar to the previous one. You just get like sector timings, so it's slightly more detailed. Tires, this is a fairly important tab. So here you can see, first of all, how many tires you've used. So particularly if you have limited tire sets, you can see how many of them here are used. Now these isn't 0 of 100 sets, because you can set individual compound tires per corner, so that is specifically tires, 100 tires. So here you can do presets, so obviously you can have softs all around, mediums all around, hards all around, or wets. Or if you want, you can have a different compound on every single corner. So for those who follow WEC, you might know that they put maybe hards on one side and mediums on the other, depending on where, or maybe softs on the front, mediums on the rear, that kind of thing. So that's where you can do this. So you've got presets which is in all four corners, or you can manually select where you want which compound. And this chain in the top right is regarding the pressures. So currently, while it's linked, the front left and front right will have the same pressures, but if you unlink them, then you can change pressures per tire individually. Hot tip, leave them minimum. I don't think there's a reason in this game currently to run them anything other than lowest pressure. So just keep that in mind. You'll probably never have to touch them, but just so you know. And down here, the engineer insight. Ignore the tire wear. You're not going to be using 10% per lap, particularly the same across all three compounds. That's very wrong. But the optimal temperatures does give you a fairly good guide. For example, in a hotter server, you might end up wanting to run, say, mediums over softs or hards over mediums, because if your tires are getting up close to 100 degrees, the hards will be closer to their operating temperatures than the mediums and will give you more grip. So you'll be getting better lap times out of them, for example. Or if it's colder, then you can move down to the softs kind of thing. So keep an eye on track temp and your tire temps and sort of make a decision based around these temps from there. Lastly is the car setup page. I'm not going to go in depth in setups. I don't even really know what I'm doing. But you do have some presets. So you have the LMU preset. For anyone who's coming from something like ACC, I'd call this like the safe setup. Whereas the CDA setup, I would call it closer to your aggressive. I quite like the CDA setups. They normally feel pretty good. Straight out of the box, they're normally perfectly fine and competitive. And if you want, you can mess with them just a little bit for personal preference, but I find you won't need to change them too much. At least not yet. For these error options, currently the radiator covers we don't need to worry about. We're not going through crazy temperature changes just yet. Rear wing, if you want, you can change that here. But the biggest one you'll use from here is your virtual energy. So basically, say we're coming to the end of practice and you're getting ready, you got 30 seconds left before quali. You can come into your car setup and you can just quickly smash this down, put in 3 laps, and that will stay as the session rolls over. So you can just roll out the door immediately for quali and you'll have 22% virtual energy and you'll be good for your 3 laps. That's the easiest way to set that in here. If we go into custom, we can change some change more detailed settings in your setup here. So you got your managed setups here. That's what you currently got loaded, so that's just the CDA default. You can compare a setup. So when you start coming in here, you can select current setup or compared setup. So if you're comparing it, say, to a mate's race setup and you wanted to see why yours felt better or worse, you can come here, you can select compared, and it will list all the differences between yours and the compared, which is pretty cool. And the last is the assigned. So the assigned is pretty handy. So if you make a setup that you really, really enjoy, you can assign it, and that will basically be the default setup that it loads. It also affects in what it'll likely affect, as it did in rFactor 2. In an endurance race, you have to assign the setup, because if you disconnect and come back or anything like that, it'll reset to the default. So if you find a setup that you like, assign it, and then it's basically the default setup for that car at that track. It's a nice little tip there. And if I had setups for Ferrari, they'd be in here. I can set it to all, but obviously I don't need caddy setups. Then you got all your separate elements. So here's the powertrain. You'll come to this one a fair chunk because this is where you can do your VE here as well, but also your fuel ratio. So basically, to try and explain VE, it is very simple. It's basically implemented by the WEC as a BOP element, so that fuel efficient cars can't just extend their stint on a fuel tank of fuel by 20 minutes, but drive at full pace. It's that sort of thing. So it still pays to be fuel efficient because you put in less fuel, so your car weighs less, but everyone has the same amount of time with virtual energy. You can quote unquote fuel save virtual energy, so you can still extend stints, you can still fuel save and all those sorts of things, but it's not, you don't just get a free 20 minutes at the same pace as everybody else. For these default setups, the fuel ratio is normally pretty bang on. I'd be surprised if it was way off for anybody, so you shouldn't have to worry about this too much. Once you have the fuel ratio set, you do not need to worry about fuel. When you come into a pit stop, you set your VE for how much you need, and it automatically gives you the fuel that you need as well, judged by the ratio. So once the fuel ratio is set, forget about fuel. And down here is the electronics. Again, you can set them in the MFD, but if you wanted to change them in the setup so they're always there, this is where you do that. And hypercar specific, you have your regen level and motor map. Regen, I would almost always recommend to have it 200 kilowatts, because the regen actually affects the braking, and it's also the reason why you don't want it at 100, because when it's 100, it doesn't need to regen, and you lose braking performance. So as far as I'm aware, you pretty much always run it at 200, and then you change the motor map to balance the battery percentage, so it's never minimum or max. Another small misconception with the hybrid is it doesn't add power. So it's not the sort of thing where you come into quali and you set it to set it to max, here we go, 200 kilowatts to get as much power as you possibly can over one lap. It is simply just how much of the hybrid is contributing to maximum power. Hypercars have a set max of 500, 600 horsepower. So if you run max electric motor, your car just becomes more fuel efficient. Whereas if you're running at 0, then you have no hybrid implementation and your engine has to use more fuel because it's creating more power. So just run that to keep the battery percentage under 100 and above 0, as I keep saying, and that's all you have to worry about. Here's your wheel and brake settings. One thing you might mess around with in here is your brake bias and brake migration. Brake migration is a great tool. Basically, with 2.5% forward, as it is here, when you slam on the brakes at 100%, your brake bias moves forward 2.5%. So instead of being 52.3% at the front, it becomes, 54.8. So as your car starts braking and all the weight transfers forward, the brake balance moves forward to increase performance, and then as you trail off, the brake migration will move back and back and back, moving the brakes towards the back, allowing you to turn in better. So it's a great little tool, that one. Some people recommend that you only run it at maximum 2%, just to give you some wiggle room that if you get a little bit of damage and you need more turn in, you can still have that extra click. But most cases, you'll be running it pretty high up there. It's a great little tool, that one. Then you got your suspension and dampers, a chassis and aero. All as confusing as they normally are. I still don't know what I'm doing. Here's your rear wing down here as well. So yeah, that's pretty much all your setup options and things that you should keep an eye out. And here's a little tip for you. This little arrow button up the top isn't an exit menu, it's an exit server. I keep doing that, so you've got to be careful. You hit this and all of a sudden it's telling you to exit the current session, and then the big bright button is to exit. Be careful of that. So we'll go back to standings. So we've set the car up, we've checked everything through. I'll quickly show you where you should look for fuel calcs and go through the MFD real quick. Alright, so we're in the car. We can see all the HUD elements around, and the bottom left being the MFD. So the first page is just your relative, so obviously if there's more people in the server, you'll see where they are relative to you and what class they're in. The next is the session details, so you can see what time it is, the weather and the forecast. There's your track grip, so you can see that it's the high grip like we set, and the track is 37.4 degrees. It keeps track of your cuts and your penalties there as well. There's your timing, so what your current lap time is, what your best is, session best, all that sort of thing. Here's your tire options, so you can see what pressure they're at, temp, what your brake temps are, and how your wear is going. That's where you see all of that. Your fuel tab is the most important. So you can see your current fuel levels and your current virtual energy levels. However, that's also in your tacho on the right hand side here. But you also get your fuel usage and your virtual energy usage. This is where you can figure out how much you're going to need per race. So basically, once you go out, you do a few laps, it'll tell you your fuel usage and your virtual energy usage. And whether you want to do the maths by yourself by figuring out how many laps you're going to do at a certain pace in 60 minutes and then timesing that by that, or find a tool online. I'm sure there's plenty of strategy calculators and whatnot that can do it already. Just plug in your numbers, it'll tell you how many laps you'll do and how much fuel you're going to have to add at your stop. But this is where you find all that information, and you can keep an eye on that. Here's your in-car electronics. So you got your traction controls. Hypercars have ARB options. Here's your brake bias. There's your brake migration. You can change that here. Your motor map. There's your regen level. And also lap target is a handy tool for anyone who doesn't know. If you're finding that you've worked out your fuel and you're going to be 1 or 2 laps short from no stopping the race or stopping yourself from having to do 2 stops, you can put in a lap target for say 2 laps, and the computers in the car will give you some flashing lights telling you when to lift and coast. So depending on from 1 to 5, well 0 to 5, it will tell you where to lift and coast to save that amount of fuel. So that is a great little tool, that one, if you're a couple of laps short. And then you got your pit stop options. So this is where you set everything up once you're coming into the pits. Obviously you got your virtual energy. You can change your fuel ratio on the go, but normally you won't have to. Here you set your tires, so you can either set all of them at the same time, depending on what compound you want. You can also set them individually, and I'll tell you mix set. The other thing is, I haven't done many races with fixed set tires, but I believe what happens is if you're out of new sets, when you come to here, instead of saying, for example, new soft, it'll say soft and then in brackets something like 90%. So you can see that you're putting on a used set of tires, but how used they are. Scrolling down a bit further, then you got your wing. You can change your wing at the pit stop. You can also change your grille to manage engine temperatures. You can also change your tire pressures, replace your brakes. I haven't messed around too much with anything other than changing tires. I believe it will affect your total pit stop time, so that has to be taken into account. And it's also somewhat important to calculate how much VE you're going to need fairly precisely. I believe a full tank is 40 seconds to get to 100% VE. So even a couple percent, even if you're only putting in 93, 94, you'll probably find you gain 3 seconds, 2-3 seconds over another car, which can make a difference. So it is worth trying to do the math on how much VE you need before a race, so that you're not just winging it while you're driving or putting in a full tank and then wasting a bunch of time. Alright, I'll walk us through an online race I did the other day. This was the WEC experience around Le Mans, but without the chicanes. Now, I already knew what the strat was going into this race. This was the second time I've done it. But I was just going out for practice lap, kind of to warm up. But then I'll show you at the end of the lap the sort of things that you're looking for as well regarding the fuel calcs. So I skip forward here. This is the end of the lap. And you can see I've moved the MFD into the fuel tab. Now, there's still currently no fuel usage, but that's because I haven't completed a lap. But as we come through the final chicane here and cross the line, you'll see that comes up. And that voice you can hear is actually a third-party app being Crew Chief, so please ignore him. He's sometimes wrong, but I find him very helpful over the game's in-game spotter. And there you can see my fuel usage coming up. It is 14 and a bit liters, and I had, I think it was 18 and a bit percent energy for VE. So now we've come to the end of practice. I'm waiting for quality to roll over. And the one thing you can do is while you're waiting for the end of the session, you can set your fuel for the next one. So coming into quali, knowing how much time there is and how many laps I can do, I've just gone just over 3 laps and pulled straight out. Also, good example of the fact that the cold tyres are very cold. So you'll notice there was a session starting, wait at pits exit. So if you're at the very back of the pit lane, like I am here, that's not too much of a concern. But if you're at the front, you really want to watch out for that, because where this green light is, that'll be red, and if you leave pits before that goes green, you'll get a drive-through, which can pretty much wreck a lot of your qualifying sessions. So watch out for that one. Don't just bolt out of the pits, make sure that that light is green. So I won't make you watch all of quali either. We can see as we cut to the end here, we set in some pretty good laps. Also looking at the times in the top left, you can see what compound people are on and how much energy they have and what times they've been setting, and also where they are, if they're in pits or on that track. And I just wanted to point out, when your 410's up, make sure that you bin it on the last corner, just like that, and then do a sweet J-turn into the finish line, just to get purple. And make sure you do that, it's highly important. But regardless, quali is finished now. So I start thinking about what I'm going to do in the race. So for this, in the 40 minutes with 2 times fuel, it is basically 2 pit stops. You'll have the first one, you'll go full tank, and then you'll fill up and go full tank again. And then you end up being 1 lap short, so you have to go to the pits and get enough fuel to do that last lap. Now you can fuel save, but to fuel save 1 lap of Le Mans is incredibly slow, so it's not really worth it, and you'll see a little bit of that at the end of the race. I was debating whether I do just 1 lap of fuel at the start of the race and immediately pull out, so I'm sort of in like free air. So you can sort of see me thinking about that here. But I eventually decided just do the full tank and just fill up right at the very end. I don't think it'd matter too much. May as well be slow while everybody else is slow on a full tank and that sort of thing. I'm not going to be able to make use of a low fuel load at the start of the race anyway. So I switch it back to 100. I do tick it down a couple of clicks because I don't need the couple of extra percent. Otherwise, it's just extra weight if you want to be super pedantic, because you'll come in with half a lap's worth of fuel. So I do lower it a little bit, and then I look at my fuel number and think, maybe that is a bit low. So I'll chuck it into safety car map here, at least just for the rolling start, just to make sure I don't use up too much fuel. I was a little bit worried. It turned out to be fine. But yeah, just a little bit less weight than what I'd need. And then you'll see when I come to the first pit stop, I do the same thing and set it for about 95, 96. Now you can see above the speedo on the right hand side there's a timer there. I don't know why it's still there, but you'll see once you join the grid before the start of the race, that'll be counting down, and when that hits 0, that's when you start rolling. So you saw that I just started rolling a little bit, waiting for everybody, and now the aim is to just try and stay roughly within this green box. It's not the best currently. It caterpillars and accordions a lot because of what everybody else is doing above you. Fair warning, there is contact at all points once you're in a race session. So during these rolling formation lap, there is contact, so don't swerve around. In the pit stops, there is contact, so watch out for that. So yeah, don't do anything too silly. Keep your distance. And also, if you struggle with having to catch up to the queue, like if you're a slow start, hopefully that's what the automatic engine start does, and then if you keep an eye on that timer, you can start rolling the moment that goes 0, and you shouldn't have to catch up and possibly risk getting that dangerous driving penalty. Eventually the hold speed sign will come up, and just use the pit limiter. If you do use the pit limiter and it's red, just brake, get under the 60k speed limit, and then accelerate back up to it. You can see here, I don't think they were using their pit limiter, as I kept having to brake. And then go for your race start. You can see no penalties. You just make sure you hit your pit limiter when the race turns green, but otherwise you'll be good to go. So I'll cut now. This is at the very end of the first stint. So we sort of made a bit of gap for ourselves, which is nice. You can see we've got about 1 lap of fuel left. So I'm going to tick it over to the fuel MFD. But you can see also the game automatically requests that pit stop, as I was mentioning earlier. So I do have a bit of damage, but honestly the car feels fine, so I've set that to do not repair. You can see the VE I've set to 96%, that'll cover me for the next 5 laps. And the fuel ratio I don't need to change, so that'll automatically fill up as much fuel as I need. Tyres, again, no change, they're perfectly fine, so making sure everything's good.
Pit crew's ready.
Pit crew's ready, so we're fine to go. So ended this lap. So this is coming into the pits now. Obviously you want to hit your markers, all the same as the usual pit stop. Bit leery through there. One thing to mention is the game doesn't auto brake when you put your pit limiter on. You have to make sure you slow down to under 60. So keep an eye on that one. You also don't have to turn your engine off coming into the pit box. So here you just line it up. I've made sure my pit stop's good. And it's not super precise. You can see it's picked me up and it's moving me, but the pit timer is going up. So once you're in the box, everything will start happening. Even if your car's moving, it's not too finicky like that. So you can see on the right hand side, putting in 96% is costing me 37 seconds. If I was repairing the damage, it would probably have a second timer on top that would say like damage, for example, 45. Now that's not saying it has 45 seconds on top of the 37. That's just saying your total pits time will be 45 seconds. It just adds each element onto the top. It's a little bit confusing, but don't worry too much. So keep an eye on the timer. Obviously you can rev it right as you're about to get dropped to make sure you get a good weight away. And again, watching out for contact, you could see a couple of those hypercars pulling it at angles. Again, that doesn't slow down your pit stop. Your mechanics will pick you up and move you around on entry and exit, so you can just plant it. Just don't hit anybody else, that's the whole goal. So overall, pretty good pit stop there. You don't have to worry too much about details like stopping directly on the lines. Just make sure you slow down enough and you got your pit stop set up how you want it.
There's a faster car approaching.
So here's almost the end of the second stint. So you can see I've still got 8 minutes left, but we only got 2 laps left. Now one thing the game does is even though I've got 2 laps of fuel left, it may request it now, and I think that's because it detects that I'm not making the final lap, so it gives you sort of a little bit of extra time to figure that one out. But you can see I've actually unrequested the pit stop, just kind of to do that. I don't know. In my mind, it's the immersion of telling the mechanics to sit down instead of standing out there and then not coming in the pits. But here I'm sort of figuring out what I'm going to do for this next stop, because obviously it's only 1 lap, and the amount of VE you put in actually does matter a little bit regarding time. So I'm trying to go as low as possible, but not fall short. So I've chosen 20 because I believe my energy percentage was about 18.7 per lap, so I just gave myself a little bit of extra buffer, and then I just committed to that, because I could have run 19%, but I was just a little bit worried about not making it. So I'll take, with a little bit of a time buffer to second the moment, I will just put that little bit extra in as a safety net. So second entry, remember, you got to slow down yourself.
Okay, Austin.
Same deal as before.
We expect to exit the pits in position 8, right ahead of Richie. One more lap.
Pull into your pit stop. Again, a bit different. This time it was straight up. Move me a little bit, that's fine, but only 6 seconds this time to do VE. So you've got to be on the ball and straight out and away we go. Now what you can see is third place here has decided to try and fuel save and hasn't come into the pits. But he is on 13%. So for this lap he has to use 5% less energy than what I use on a full pace lap, which is incredibly difficult, but he's given himself a nearly 9-second gap. So the race was on at this point. We didn't get any DTs for pit speeding, or didn't ruin any of our pit stops. Damage was fine. So, and this is the sort of difference between the 2-stop and the 1-stop. So obviously he's now on 1% coming through the Porsche curves, had to slow right down. Yeah, this was a real close race. Little spoiler, I do get him on the exit of the Porsche curves here. And you see, I did not too bad with the virtual energy calculation. I've still got 3% left. I think I crossed the line with 2%. So yeah, I mean, as I gave myself the buffer with 20%, that worked quite nicely. I could push the entire lap and I wasn't concerned. But then also, it was kind of close with the driver who fuel saved. He did end up finishing in the pits, which is a bit slow.
Well done, Austin.
But
Great
theoretically,
win.
if
You
I had a
deserved
couple
that
of extra
today.
seconds, I might not have actually caught him. So it does pay to be fairly precise. But yeah, that was a full online race with the pit stops and the strategy. I hope that helps and gives you a couple of ideas of what they're expecting from you. Alright, thanks everyone. This was a video just on the basics of basically setting up LMU and practicing and going through a full race session. I hope you found it helpful. If you got any questions, please feel free to ask. I'll answer them as best I can. But yeah, cheers for watching. I hope it helped. See you guys next time.